am Philip McGowan. I am the person who runs the liberal arts degree here in Queen's. And we currently have 3 intakes. So we have first year, second year, and third years. And so if you join us come September, you will be in the 4th intake into this degree. So it's taken a little time. It's, some other liberal arts programs have been more established, but we are steadily building our cohorts as time passes. We expect to take in 15 to 20 people, maybe 25. I don't know. It just depends when we get to September. So I'm going to go through some of the reasons why it's a really good idea to come to Queen's. And I'm going to talk about some of the modules on the liberal arts program, and some of the new modules that are coming on starting this year, 2021, 22. And then any questions you have, please feel free to ask. So the program is, as you probably know, 4 years. That isn't the same as a lot of the liberal arts programs. You will see some that are 3 years or some that are 4 years. We just thought we needed 4 years to be able to give people the chance for a placement opportunity in a work environment as part of the program, and that happens in the 3rd year, as well as international study abroad. So to try and do that, have a placement, have the discipline, strengths and excellence in our subjects, as well as the flexibility to move between them, we felt you needed 4 years to be able to carry that off. You may be familiar with this table of the module structure or the degree structure, but just to outline a couple of things, the green modules are all the liberal arts modules, the core ones anyway. And you do one of those each year. In the 2nd year, you do a second non-credit one, so Careers and Employability, Lib 2002. That's the placement preparation module. It gets you ready for thinking about a placement, where you might approach, what employers you want to talk to, what a cover letter looks like, what your CV could look like, and could be how to improve that. Just tips of the trade, really, about thinking about employment and the world of employment, and how you bring your degree specialities and your abilities together with a workplace. And the idea of the placement, you see it there in the first semester or the first half of the 3rd year. The idea of that is that hopefully by that stage you know kind of what your pathway is, and that you take a placement in a relevant employer, but that really depends on you. Also in 3rd year, you have study abroad for the 2nd semester, and this could be at any one of our international partners around the world. We have literally hundreds, so it really depends on where you want to go. We're still in the Erasmus scheme as guaranteed by the Irish government, so that's a good thing for us and a better thing for our students. So, in terms of a central pathway, you'll see the pale blue blocks that go down the middle of this degree structure. So let's say your, anthropology, for example, might be your subject area of choice or interest. Then you would do 2 modules in anthropology in the 1st year, 3 in the 2nd, just the 1 in the 3rd year, and then in the 4th year, which is at master's level, you take either 1, 2, or 3 anthropology modules. It really depends on you. We would anticipate that the dissertation would have a connection between your core pathway and liberal arts issues that hopefully come out of that 4th year module, Incorrigibly Plural. That's a module which emphasizes the importance of plurality, not just in terms of education, but in terms of how we deal with the world and society. Plurality as an understanding of difference and an acceptance of difference. It will begin by looking at human rights as the sort of key principle of pluralism in a 21st century society. Interdisciplinary modules at 1st and 2nd year, these vary a little bit depending on staff availability, but they usually are modules that are taught across a couple or more than a couple of disciplines, or they are taught in a discipline, but they look at a range of different contexts and questions. Okay. If it were the case that you were doing liberal arts with a language, slight modification to things here, it's a 4-year program as with the liberal arts degree, and a 4-year program as with the joint language degrees in French, Portuguese, and Spanish. Where we make a slight change here is that you do half of the degree in the language. So it could be French or Portuguese or Spanish. You do half of your degree in one of those languages. You have the whole of the 3rd year away as your international placement and study abroad, which is exactly the same as joint degree language students. It's really important that you have the same experience or a similar enough experience to those students, because as you might expect, if you're doing one of those languages, you'll be in those classes of students who are doing single honors Spanish or Spanish in history or Spanish in English or Spanish in politics. So you're in with all of these different people. It's the same with any degree program. You know, if you're doing anthropology as your pathway, obviously, although you're on the liberal arts program, you're going to be in the modules with students doing anthropology, anthropology in English, anthropology in history, etc. So that's a slight modification for languages. These are the current pathways that are designated single subject pathways that you can do through the degree, and it's totally up to you. Usually, the case is at the end of the 1st year, you sit down with your personal tutor, me most likely, and we look at what you've done and what you're interested in doing and where your pathway might take you, and what it is that you want to follow. And it could be that you want to follow a single disciplinary subject like anthropology or English or Irish or whatever it is. Or it could be that you want to make your own pathway. And this can be done in a number of ways. You can identify modules in a certain topic or theme or area, such as American studies. For example, I teach American studies. So, you can do American literature, American film, American politics, American history, and they could broadly be defined as an American studies pathway, or you could follow gender. You could take modules that are interested in questions of gender in the contemporary world. It could be women's writing, it could be women's drama, it could be questions about gender in terms of human geography. It really does depend on the module. So you can either tailor make your own pathway, or you have a disciplinary subject as your pathway. You will graduate either way with an M liberal arts and whatever. So M liberal arts and anthropology could be a degree. We have a student at the moment who is in her 2nd year, and she has done a lot of modules in terms of colonialism and post-colonialism. So she is looking at a degree qualification, M liberal arts and post-colonial studies. Yeah. So she'd be a thematic tailor-made pathway degree person. It really does depend on yourself and your interests and where you want to take your own interests and studies. While you do have your core pathway or pathway interest in a certain subject or subjects, the liberal arts is a subject area in its own right. It's not just like a mechanical structure that allows you to be flexible. It's also a subject area on the degree. And the single honors, the subject pathway in liberal arts, I do too many of these talks on different subjects. The core modules are designed, tailor-made modules are designed to speak to contemporary issues in the world. Okay, I'm going to go through a couple of these in a second. And the way we do that is by bringing colleagues from different subjects from across the university, mainly from arts and humanities and social sciences. So we have sociologists, we've got historians, we've got philosophers, we've got drama people, language people, literary studies people, critical studies people, coming in and giving a week or 2 weeks on different issues in the world. And we want our students to develop and deepen their understanding of the world and how to respond to it. It won't have escaped your attention that this year we have been overshadowed by a pandemic. So the 1st year module in liberal arts for our students last year and for this year was called, it's always called Understanding Now, and we were understanding pandemics. We were looking at the history of pandemics, in the world through both geographers and archaeologists, as well as historians, looking at the Black Death in Europe and then in England, but also looking at the financial and business consequences of a pandemic, how countries came out of the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 after the First World War, what we learned from previous incidents of pandemics. But on this module, we had health professionals. So we had a colleague who is a practicing doctor as well as teaching in the medicine school in Queens, talking about how the pandemic was working out in the early stages, certainly by September, October last year. We looked at the political fallout and the ecological fallout of the pandemic on society, and also how education has been affected, and it's clearly been hugely affected. Everything's online, doing things virtually. Will that be the way of it in the future? How much of our lives will be spent engaging virtually? How will universities and schools adjust to think about what is it that what kind of graduates do we need in the future? Who are the people we need coming out of university in 3 or 4 years' time who are able to help address the questions that have been raised by coronavirus? Because those questions will not be answered in the next few months, even if we are all vaccinated. There's going to be a longer term issue about mental health, well-being, economic recovery, business recovery, political fallout. These are questions that we're going to be tackling for years to come. The second year core module in liberal arts is uses of the past. And that, certainly last year, in the wake of the death of George Floyd and the protests in America and elsewhere and the Black Lives Matter movement, looked at the question of colonial legacy, commemorations, what statues are for, what they commemorate, who they commemorate, the methods of understanding the past, and how history has been deployed by various contemporary commentators and politicians, usually, either to ignore or to reinforce racial prejudice. So these are questions that are hugely important at this point in time. Also, Northern Ireland has its own issues with the past and how the legacy of centuries of difference, let's call it, have worked themselves to the point now where we have the fallout from Brexit, the potential for Scotland maybe to leave the Union and what that might mean for Ireland, a reunified Ireland or not. And within all of that, there's the larger question about decolonising the curriculum, moving beyond just a kind of white version of the 21st century. So those are all questions we look at in the past. Here's some of the people who might teach you, depending on what you do. If it is anthropology, there's 2 anthropologists there, Don Bryan up in the top right, laughing for some reason. And then the bottom left, there's Evi Chatsapanagiotou, who's Greek and is great. They're all great. I'm delighted to be able to call these people my colleagues, having taught in various places around the world. I'm blessed to have these people work alongside them. Don't tell them I said that, because we don't want them to be too flattered. In terms of America and my area of interest, next year in the second semester of the 4th year of the program, this new module is coming on, America's Aftermaths. And it starts from the premise of the notion that the 20th century was the American century, so-called, and what's the fallout from that? What is the current state of play in the United States, particularly in the wake of the attack on the Capitol on the 6th of January, the big lie that the election was stolen, and the big lie that continues to be propagated by Trump-supporting right-leaning Republican politicians and their supporters, QAnon and all the conspiracy theories around QAnon, but also America, has never dealt with the question of race. In 1903, the Black American philosopher and writer W.E.B. Du Bois wrote that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, and he wrote that in 1903, only 3 years into the 20th century. He already called it, and he was right, and it's still a massive rupture and fracture within the United States in the 20th century, 21st century, as we've seen with George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, all of those unnecessary murders by U.S. law enforcement. So racism, Black Lives Matter is a massive question for the United States in the 21st century, as is the Me Too movement and the position of women within American society. Finally, we've got the first female vice president. It's noticeable that America was more willing to elect a black president before a female president. How long will that remain the case? And the Me Too movement grew out of the allegations against Harvey Weinstein, and then, it started this viral worldwide campaign that women were coming forth and saying, they were the victims of sexual discrimination and sexual violence and harassment. How is that going to be addressed in the world? So there's a number of big issues on the table at the moment with the United States, and will, no matter about the vaccine and the Biden administration seeming to be better, because it is, but it's only new. But the 21st century could be a century of American decline, and there's a number of issues. I'll just go through 6 of them, and then I'm going to stop. But there's a number of issues here that need to be thought about and discussed in the coming years. Gun violence in the United States is still a major issue within American society. In 1994, the majority of youth and teen deaths in the United States were through car accidents. It's now through gun violence. Since the Columbine shooting in Colorado in 1999, there have been 231 instances of school shootings in which lives have been lost. So it doesn't count the ones where lives weren't lost, where there was misfires or people were only wounded. Only wounded, can you imagine? 304 people have died in school shootings since 1999 in the United States. So the question of gun violence in America still prevalent. The second issue, HR 1, House Resolution 1, or Senate 1 when it goes to the Senate, For the People Act, brought by the Democrats, is on the floor now, is about to be discussed. This will be the central issue for American politics for the next few months and potentially years, because HR 1 seeks to improve access to the ballot, to allow more people to vote, to allow more days and hours in the day to vote, more postal ballots. If it doesn't pass, and it may need a majority in the Senate of 60, which is very, very hard to see it happening. If it doesn't pass, across 43 states currently, there are 253 pieces of legislation seeking to restrict and suppress the vote, particularly in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, and in Georgia, the states that Biden flipped in the last election. And it is, in so many of these instances, it is a race card that is being played because it wants to restrict and suppress the vote of Black Americans. So that is a huge issue that, depending on which way it goes, will affect the 2022 midterms and the next presidential election in the United States, and later ones as well. Because Trump was able to pick 4 Supreme Court justices, unbelievable. Some presidents don't get any. The constitution of the Supreme Court has shifted very markedly to the right. And it's a 6-3 conservative leaning split. This will affect American legislative policy for the next 3 or 4 decades. And that's something to be watched closely. Terrorism, both foreign and domestic, still is an issue that America will deal with in this 21st century. September 11th is now beginning to disappear into the distance. It'll be 20 years this September. But American foreign policy in the wake of that, and where it has brought the world, has been of huge significance. The Capitol attack by domestic terrorists and the not quite leaving the stage issues of Trump at the moment leaves America wondering whether it will be at the mercy of Trumpism and the Trumpian dynasty for years to come. There's also the issue of the coronavirus. The vaccine rollout in America is going well now, but over 540,000 people have died in the United States, nearly 30 million cases. So, how will America recover, and what will that recovery look like? So, these are all massive questions that module in your final year of the degree you could take. This would be an optional module, it's not a core module. These are the requirements to get in. You probably know all of this. So I'm going to stop there